It is not your fault. The first time I was diagnosed with gestational diabetes, I cried. I was so worried that it was something I had done to my child, and I felt horrible. But what you have to realize is there's a large part of gestational diabetes that is genetic. It's not necessarily something that can be prevented. There is this idea that diabetes is only diet and lifestyle. And while that is a factor, there is a genetic component to it too. And when you're going through something like pregnancy where you're putting on so much weight, some of that genetic factor comes in. And I was told by everybody, the doctors, the nurses, the phlebotomists, everyone was like, oh, you're thin. You're not going to have to worry about that. You're not overweight. So gestational diabetes is not going to be a problem for you, because there's this stigma, this stereotype that is perpetuated about diabetes, that it's completely comes down to your diet and lifestyle. And at the time of my first pregnancy and my second pregnancy, I was actually closer to underweight than I was to overweight. So, if that stereotype exists, it makes sense that no one thought there was any chance that I would have it. And my doctors were honestly shocked. The worst part of the gestational diabetes test for me was not the drink and not the blood draws. I got used to the blood draws really quickly. I mean, you kind of do when you're doing just so many of them. And the drink was kind of like a really extra sweet flat soda. It was not great because it gives you like a really bad headache. And maybe it wasn't as bad for me because I had diabetes. That's what I suspect. I don't know if there's any merit to that. But the drink really wasn't all that bad. The blood draws weren't that bad. It was the waiting that sucked for me. There's a 1 hour test, there's a 2 hour test, and there's a 3 hour test. Some people only require the 2 hour test, and some people require the 1 hour and the 3 hour test. So I did the 1 hour and the 3 hour test. With the 1 hour, they were like, oh, it's so close. You're definitely going to pass the 3 hour. A lot of people fail the 1 hour and pass the 3 hour, which is true. But I failed both. The 3 hour is excruciating to sit and wait through for me. People will say, oh, bring a book so you don't get bored. Have something to do on your phone so you don't get bored. I think if you've had multiple instances and diagnosis of gestational diabetes, if you're planning on having a lot of kids or more than 2, you can opt out of the 3 hour test. If you fail the 1 hour, just go straight to monitoring your blood sugar, because there's no point in sitting there for what is most likely going to be a fail. Because as you get older, unless you've gotten significantly better health, it doesn't get more likely that you're going to pass the 3 hour test. It gets less likely over time. So unless you've dropped a lot of weight and really cleaned up your diet and lifestyle so much that it might have an outsized impact on the test, it's probably genetic and you're probably going to fail. So just when you get to those later pregnancies, opt out. Don't waste your time. Just go straight to monitoring your blood sugar. Food affects different people differently. So with my first, I was able to take a diabetes class when I was diagnosed with gestational diabetes. And with my second, I actually had a week-long hospital stay with some preterm labor symptoms. And in both of those, they gave me a limit of how many carbs and how much protein I should be having for each meal. And they said, as long as you stay within that range, you'll be fine. Your numbers will be fine. That is not necessarily true. So as a general rule, you want to go less processed. That's pretty important. But different people are going to respond differently to different foods. And for me, I didn't find that staying within the carb limit necessarily would keep my number lower. So I had to kind of experiment, and everybody kind of has to experiment to see what their body does with that. So along with less processed and kind of limiting a little bit your carbs, making sure you're getting enough protein, fiber, get a lot of fiber. And one thing you could do is high volume eating, which is eating a ton of vegetables at the beginning, like green loading your meals so that you feel full, and then the fiber helps with processing. So some of the tricks that I found to help my blood sugar numbers, I didn't actually learn until my third pregnancy. One of them was the order in which you eat your food. So if it's a dish that you can eat in a specific order, if you start with your fiber and then do fats, proteins, and then do sugars, it'll help keep your blood sugar more stable, and you won't see as much of a spike. Another great trick is to spend 20 to 30 minutes after each meal walking. And this is mild to moderate walking. You don't want to do vigorous exercise, because vigorous exercise can actually raise your blood sugar. So you want mild to moderate walking for 20 to 30 minutes. And that actually helps blunt that blood sugar spike again. And that's what we're trying to do, is keep it as level as possible. Occasionally, if you get a spike, it's not the end of the world, but generally speaking, you want to keep your blood sugar levels as stable as possible. Consuming lots of water and sleep. This did not have as big of an effect that I could track and notice on my blood sugar levels, but it does help overall to maintain those levels. And so with the water, I would do like 12 ounces before I ate, 12 ounces after I ate, and sometimes 12 ounces when I got up, 12 ounces before bed. And so that it's just like a ton of water. And I'm not even counting anything else besides water that had water content, just water, lots of sleep. All the things you're supposed to be getting anyway with pregnancy. One additional note, though, is that people will say, oh, you're peeing a lot because you're pregnant. Okay, if you have gestational diabetes, diabetes also makes you pee a lot. So when you couple that with pregnancy, you're just going to be peeing all the time. It's going to be miserable, and people will not understand if they have not gone through it. As your body grows, your blood sugar numbers will get worse over time. So when you start your gestational diabetes, navigating that journey, you might find some foods that work well for you that don't spike your sugars too much. And then by the end of it, you might find that they're spiking your sugars. And so you have to kind of adjust as you go along, as your body gets worse and worse at processing the sugars. That being said, don't go keto. It's not good for your body to be in a starvation mode while you're pregnant. Don't go keto. It is hard to maintain diets like vegan, vegetarian when you're pregnant. And so if it's not an ethical concern for you, maybe allow some wiggle room for some of those. We're mostly vegetarian most of the time. Just in order to make life a little bit more functional, it was helpful to add it back in some of the meat. It's possible to still do vegan, vegetarian, but generally speaking, my advice, and I'm not a doctor, would be to not do any diets that are particularly restrictive unless you really have to. Definitely don't go carnivore. That's not the time. If you're going to test out carnivore, do not do it while you're pregnant. So some of my meal go-tos. Taco salad. Taco salad is great because you can really add a lot of veg to it and get that fiber content, and you can limit the carbs without eliminating them most of the time. So generally when I started, I could do a few chips, like a small handful of chips, and sprinkle that in. But then maybe by the end, I would leave out the chips. And still you can get a pretty decent meal just doing taco salad. Omelet or eggs. I did an omelet a lot that had beans, like refried beans and tomato and sour cream on it. And that was really good. Additionally, quiche, spinach quiche was something I did a lot. And you can do just regular, or you can do crustless if you're having trouble processing the carbs a lot. You could do a crustless variety of spinach quiche. Peanut butter oats. I still do peanut butter oats pretty frequently. This is kind of my go-to breakfast. And sometimes I do an overnight oats version, which added like a half a banana and a little bit of milk. But lately I've been doing a microwave heated one that's just like oats, chia seeds, water, peanut butter, cinnamon, tiny bit of sugar. That works really well. I found that especially the overnight oats version that's cold, I had no problems with that. And I think sometimes people are like, oh, oats are carbs, they're going to spike my sugar. I think usually you're using too much. Use less, it'll still keep you pretty full. It doesn't usually have an effect. I only use like a quarter cup of dry oats or less. Like I really don't use very much. And then the chia seeds, add a lot of chia seeds to it. Strawberries, yogurt, granola. This you have to kind of limit the granola a little bit, especially if it's a sweetened one, and you don't want to use a sweetened yogurt. But between the strawberries and the granola, it wasn't a problem for me to use plain yogurt. I don't normally like plain yogurt, but it wasn't a problem. So that was another go-to for breakfast when I got tired of oats. For snacks, I did a lot of cheese sticks and nuts. Easy, didn't have to think about it too much, just had them on hand whenever I was hungry, especially if my sugar was already high but I was hungry. Cheese stick, nuts. Chocolate smoothie. I think I found the recipe on YouTube a long time ago. And so I do it. It's like a banana or half a banana if a whole banana is too much for you. Some avocado, milk, ice. You could put vanilla in there, cocoa powder. Chicken, broccoli, penne Alfredo. Love this dish. Do it all the time. I make my own sauce. I think it's pretty easy. It's just like a stick of butter, a bag of Parmesan cheese, and pasta water. That's the whole recipe. I blend it in the blender because I'm too lazy to do the whisking. But the penne is good because you could get a good whole grain penne. And if you're on WIC, a lot of times that you can find it covered on WIC. You could get it for free. So the whole grain penne is good. It has a lot of fiber in it, so which is helpful for processing your sugars. And what you want to do is just limit it to a small amount. But since it's so full, so dense, it helps keep you full longer still. And then you just overload it with broccoli and add quite a bit of chicken, and it's great, it's delicious, and easy. Soups and chili. Almost any soup or chili that you like can work within a gestational diabetes diet. So I did chili, I did chicken tortilla soup, zuppa toscana, and like a cheeseburger soup, and all of those were great, didn't really spike my sugar, especially if you're pregnant in the winter. Gestational diabetes sucks, it's no fun, but it's not your fault, and it's only for a season. It'll get easier as you keep learning what works for you and your body.